Hello and welcome to some more Star Citizen. We are looking at CIG dev responses today. Some real interesting pieces here. One talking about a focus on Star Citizen 1.0, which would literally be an initial release of the game out of alpha and beta. More plans for alpha 3.23, Star Citizen's combat and flight modes and balance being talked about, FPS changes, Vulkan, lots of good stuff. So, let's start with this biggie that goes off on a tangent from the future of bed logging. So this is a thread I saw where the OP talks about bed logging currently in game, allowing one person 30 kilometers away from a landmark to log off and log back on in the same place that they were. You log off in the bed there, bam, you log back in, as long as you're not being attacked. But they were curious on the future of how this will work with capital ships and multiple players, and what if you can't spawn there because the ship's destroyed or for some reason or because the owner's offline. CIG's Chad McKinney clarified that bed logging has nothing to do with cargo, and cargo functionality is changing in Alpha 3.23, as some people in this thread were talking about that a bit, but he said, nope, sort of nothing to do with each other. He then went on to say, I've had a lot of folks ping me to ask me to follow up on the main question here, which is fair, since I rolled into the topic to clarify a tangential question. We are looking at what we have now and the vision for 1.0 for this feature and many others. The way bed logging works in-game isn't going to fit that vision, but really more fundamentally, bed logging itself doesn't entirely fit that vision. I don't want to overly speak to specifics now, but what we ultimately want is to be more ambitious and fundamentally revisit what logging in, persistence, spawning, and everything around it is. In this new world, we're going to have a drastically different game that has server meshing, persistent hubs and hangars, player-created bases, multiple solar systems, and more. That said, because of all of that, it won't be something you'll see change in 3.23. On the road to Star Citizen 1.0, this is one of many things in-game we are going to be looking at to make sure it's hitting the mark for what the game needs to be and the vision that Chris Roberts has. A user then asked, slightly off topic here, and I may be reading into it too much given that I only really started following the project in 2023, but this isn't the only time 1.0 was referenced in this manner. Is it reasonable to assume that the 4.x cycle will be the last one before 1.0? After all, it will include server meshing and a lot of polishing and wrapping up various features. And Chad again replied, internally, we are focused on Star Citizen 1.0 as our primary goal, and everything we are doing and planning is specific to hitting the vision that we have for Star Citizen 1.0. I don't want to get into specific releases or dates or particular feature lists, but much of what we've already talked about publicly are critical parts of that 1.0 vision, such as server meshing, like you mentioned. I'm really sort of excited to see Cloud Imperium devs start talking about 1.0 as a fully released sort of Star Citizen game at some point in the future, and then actually working towards that, because that means that it is something that is on the horizon. It may be several years on the horizon, but they are working towards that. I think that's only good. There was another thread. Are elevators effectively another vehicle? Chad McKinney replied, they're similar in many ways, such as having their own physics grid, but different in many other fundamental ways, such as lacking direct input for control or destructibility, for example. This is one advantage of an entity component system, so that you can write code and logic as modular chunks and compose them to achieve more complicated behaviors. Another thread, implementation of master modes in the PTU live environment. The OP here says, I was curious about when you implement master modes into the live/sandbox environment. In other words, in-game, not just in Arena Commander. Will all ships just be ready for master modes? Will we be given any additional ships to help test? Will all ships be tuned for master modes or just some partially tuned? Montic from CIG responded, to clarify your doubts, all ships flyable in Alpha 3.23's live environment will feature the master mode updates, including SCM nav mode and the remaining features shown in the last master modes inside Star Citizen. As mentioned in that video, the team is currently converting existing ships into their designated archetypes. Additionally, where feasible, we'll aim to provide a more specific fine-tuned setup for each ship. However, please note that extreme performance changes may not be expected at this stage. We want to assess how these archetypes perform across all aspects and scenarios of the game, not just in PvP. They did then go on to say that some ships might not be fully tuned for master modes during their initial release, though they will try and get as much flavour and character into each ship as possible. So I think that's just really important to know that Cloud Imperium are actively going to be trying to improve master modes beyond the 3.23 release. Obviously, they're going to be iterating on that. They're going to be adding flavor to ships and to the archetypes and all that sort of jazz, because master modes does sort of flatten out some of the depth that the current flight and combat models have, and they sort of need to add some of that back. And there's going to be a lot more coming when we have a lot more features as well, with engineering and all that sort of jazz as well. There was a thread and some Twitch clips talking about master modes and some problems with them, and things like buccaneers shouldn't be able to take out a hammerhead without being threatened, stuff like that. And obviously there are issues with players being able to, in the current flight model, just be able to outrange capital ships. A dev said, "We don't want to constantly micromanage balance currently. We want to work towards the end goal. Maelstrom is on its way and will change how these sort of scenarios play out, not to mention the addition of many other things like engineering, etc. So at the moment, we want to get as much as we can of the new stuff in-game. We're not going to be overly tuning to compensate for issues. It is more important to establish an acceptable balance that we are confident with going forward with what's ahead, so that we minimise the rewind time of going back and rebalancing everything when these new systems do come in." I'm not saying we're ignoring capital ship balance, far from it. I'm not saying that we are not making patch-to-patch balance updates. If you look at the incremental 3.22.1 EP2 patch notes, you can see an abundance of amazing tweaks made by the vehicle balance team to deliver a better experience for the patch in every single iteration. And I'm definitely not just saying these are a later problem. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. They are a now problem that we will balance with the wider context. So yeah, I very much encourage anyone to try out master modes in 3.22.1 in Arena Commander, both PvP, PvE, mess around with it, give CIG your feedback. Obviously, you'll have a chance to give more feedback after it goes live in 3.23 as well. You'll be able to see it working more at scale and in its more appropriate environment. I say more appropriate, obviously it needs to work in both environments. But it is good to know that Cloud Imperium are pushing again towards the future, because constant iteration and balance on stuff in-game now might not necessarily be a great idea when you're trying to get all these new features in. I do want a game to get into a beta state and then balance it a lot more. If you see what I mean, because yeah, trying to get everything really well balanced now, then adding a fundamental change, well, that balance is all out of whack, and you've spent a lot of time doing balance. In regards to master modes and atmospheric flight, I saw another question. Well, I saw another answer and clarification. The master mode ships in 3.22.1 were only superficially tuned for atmospheric flight. Originally, it was not even planned to have atmospheric maps for master modes in 3.22, but given that this is a highly experimental mode, we just turned it on to see what would happen. For 3.23, all ships will be thoroughly balanced. I can't give you the goal velocities yet, as it's still all pending. So yeah, ship movement speeds and maneuverability should be in a relatively good place for 3.23, but again, we're going to have to wait for it to be in our hands. Another question on a different thread. Quick question on Vulkan versus Direct3D 11/12. Many on here seem to think that the shift to Vulkan will represent a big increase in performance, but my assumption is that the choice of Vulkan or Direct3D is not based on performance reasons, as it's possible to write slow or fast 3D code using either platform. Is my assumption correct? Is the upcoming, when released, Vulkan implementation more performant due to performance work having been abandoned in the Direct3D engine and put into the Vulkan engine? Also, what is the primary reason to be exclusively shifting over to Vulkan rather than having both Direct3D and Vulkan as a choice? This was responded to. Fundamentally, the decision was that we needed to move to one of the current gen graphics APIs, be that Vulkan or Direct3D 12 or Metal, but we're not on Mac. Vulkan is theoretically faster than Direct3D 11 because it moves a lot of stuff that happened by Magic in Direct3D 11 out of the realm of Magic and makes it the developer's problem. So the initial stage of a Vulkan port most likely runs slower and has more broken features, but the performance work is more able to address the root cause of a problem rather than having to work around a load of stuff in a black box. Besides performance though, there are features, most notably ray tracing, that aren't available in older engines, so we needed to upgrade. As to why we're not doing Direct 3D 12 mode as well, is a question of whether there's a benefit in doing it. Direct 3D 12 is very different from 11, arguably closer to Vulkan, so there's not a straightforward upgrade path from our Direct 3D 11 code. We have people who could write the 12 backend from scratch, but they're already writing the Vulkan backend. They've just been planning to do Vulkan. They think it's the best option. That's why they're choosing Vulkan for the game, and I'm hoping we actually see it in-game ASAP. Could it be for 3.23? Maybe. Is it going to be for 4.0? Probably if it's not in 3.23. What FPS changes are coming for Alpha 3.23 was another thread I saw. Zach Priest CIG responded. Expect balance changes. No details to go into now, but I have been cooking some. Also, snipers are usable long range, but expect them to be more deadly next patch with an unexpected cost associated. Grenade launchers and shotguns are going to have some fixes and buffs. There's going to be scope improvements. There was then a bit of a chat of when it comes to Persistent Universe versus Arena Commander balance, what's going on there. Persistent Universe balancing comes first before Arena Commander, which is why snipers are like they currently are. With Persistent Universe balancing, you can imagine the difficulty that comes from having such a large variety of engagement ranges. A big thing I want to lean into is giving weapons an identifiable range they win at, mainly focusing on the S71 and Gallant for anything beyond 50 meters-ish. These weapons will have longer aim-down sight times and larger hip-fire times as not to be strong in close-quarters combat. Looking across what some other games do, Battlefield solves this by having fairly low recoil. High times to kill games like Apex typically have heavy aim-down sights, movement speed penalties to make their targets easier to hit at distance. Dependent on the weapon class, we generalize this across all weapons currently. For Star Citizen, a good route for Star Citizen is having more direct medium to long engagement range weapons that have much lower recoil. Couple that damage fall off of weapons being too harsh in the current patch, which will see some adjustments. The weapon reset bug that causes tap firing to be really inaccurate. Item blocking, you basically have this design issue where you want the higher time to kill because of the cost associated with death in Star Citizen juxtaposed with the engagement range variety, but with the above tweaks, it should make those longer range engagements much better. So it's a complicated issue that will take some time to feel out. Arena Commander is a good test bed for the meat and potatoes of combat, but doesn't scale up to what the Persistent Universe needs for combat. Always an interesting one. Balance and getting FPS and ship balance all right. When do you do it? There's a load of extra features coming in. When's the best time to polish all this stuff? There's Squadron 42 versus the Persistent Universe and fundamental differences in the way that they want to tell a story in Squadron versus how they need to have stuff balanced for PvP and that sort of stuff in the Persistent Universe. It's all really interesting, but I'm interested to know what you think. Are you excited for Cloud Imperium starting to talk more, at least in this situation, about a version 1 of the game? Are you testing out master modes? What do you think of them at the moment? Are you impressed by them? Do you think they're a terrible idea? What direction do you think they should go in? How would you improve them? Whatever your thoughts or questions, I would love to hear from you in the comments below.
Let me set you a riddle. You have a fox, a chicken, and a sack of corn, and you have to transport them from one side of the river to the other using a rowing boat. You can only carry one of these with you back and or forth. You can't leave the chicken and the fox together. That's mad. Nor can the chicken be left with the grain, nor all three together without you. How do you do it? With nordvpn.com/BoredGamer. Turn that bad boy on and just set your location to the other side of the river. Done. Not only do you have all your wares, but also you can get around regional content blocks, have your data encrypted for more security. It's easy to toggle on and off. It's non-invasive. It helps you with other riddles as well. If a sphinx is asking you, what goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? NordVPN! Get it now from the links below. Every month we have a giveaway for a ship, and for March we are giving away an Argo raft with persistent hangars, freight elevators, and hauling missions coming with Alpha 3.23. What better way to experience that type of gameplay than with your own hauler? All you need to do to be in for a chance of winning that is comment on any of our videos made during the month, A single comment per video counts, so get involved with watching all my videos for more chances to win. There's more details in the description. Also, I won't ask you to contact me on Telegram or anything like that. This is my only YouTube account I will use to talk in my comments as well. Occasionally there are scammers about. I don't want people to get tricked. A massive thank you to everyone that supports the channel, be that liking videos, commenting on them, sharing them. There are also people that go the extra mile. These are amazing people that become Patreons or use the join button under my YouTube videos to become channel members. You'll occasionally get some exclusive content, Discord roles, and behind the scenes posts. It's those people with those memberships that allow us to make the daily Star Citizen content that we do. So please consider joining those awesome folks as well. Thank you for watching until the very end. It is genuinely appreciated, and I hope you have a great March.